Charlie Angus, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Madame Bennett. It's always a pleasure to have you at our committee. We really appreciate your engagement on this issue. I'm looking at the overall numbers that the department is putting out this year. So will you confirm that the money for base funding for programs will be 2% this year?
Base funding?
Yeah, the base funding for Indigenous Affairs for 2016-2017 is at 2% this year?
2%. Yeah, 2% of what?
Of a 2% increase.
Oh, it's way more than that. Yeah, maybe Paul will just go over.
Well, no, I just got this on an order paper question signed by you. So the average the increase for base funding, so this isn't discretionary funding, 1997, 1998, 2%. 99, 2%, 2000, let's just skip forward, 2008, 2008, 2009, 2%, 2015, 2%, 2016, 2017, 2% increase of base funding. So
Charlie, on, and Paul will carry this on, but in terms of the basic escalator, and then there's program funding that goes on top of it, which has been really seriously ramped up, right? So maybe Paul will explain how the base funding changes.
Well, I understand how base funding works. The issue is that the base funding has been capped at 2%. Discretionary funding never was. So, I mean, the previous government talked about record investments, but that's money that is announced. It's specific program funding, but the base funding has been capped at 2% per year. So it's still capped at 2%, correct?
No, that's not true. We're in a transition period between what was the previous government's in 2%, and you will see through items such as education in a future SUP a ramp up in terms of escalators.
Okay, but education, again, that is program funding, base funding, because the Prime Minister said as part of this, we will immediately lift the 2% cap on funding for First Nation programs. Budget 2016 said the government has committed to lift the 2% funding cap to establish a new fiscal relationship of sufficient, predictable, and sustainable funding. And yet, out of this budget, the base funding is still at 2%.
Charlie, the 2% cap included program funding before. So all the money that's being ramped up now breaks way out of the 2%.
Well, I hear that, but I'm looking at what the government spent, this government spending on wastewater, and what the previous government spent on wastewater, and it looks to me they actually spent more on wastewater. So that is separate from the 2% cap. We're talking about the base funding is still at 2%. Why is it? Excuse me, with the population increase of 4.22% this year? Why is it the overall program funding in the base funding that goes into the communities is still at 2%? So the cap is still in place. You can have discretionary funding for all manner of things like the previous government spent on wastewater. They spent billions. The rest of the program funding was still 2%.
Charlie, this is the problem with estimates and what's in a budget. There is the 2% cap is gone, and there'll be a time lag until the next SUPs as to how this ramps up. So
from the supplements, this is from your
Charlie,
order paper question that shows that in 2016, 2017 base funding. No, I'm talking apples to apples. 2% by 2% every single year of base funding. It's still 2%.
No, when we said we'd raise the cap, we said that we would raise the cap, and that means the project funding was also at 2% before, and so this is very different. And so I wouldn't waste your time on this because the 2% cap is gone.
Well, I don't know. I'm looking at 1995-96. It was 6% increase for base funding. It was 3% in 1996-97, and every single year the base funding has been clocked at 2%, which is for this year the base funding is still at 2%. So you can have discretionary funding. You can promise to put spending on special projects. Now that's money that gets announced in press releases. That's money that has a limited lifespan. But the base program funding, that was always the issue. That's what the national chief had said. That one thing to move communities forward is to get rid of that cap. So why on base funding is it still at 2% for 2016, 2017?
So there is a time lag between budget 2016 and what you will see in terms of escalators and the lifting of the cap in future estimates. And so what you haven't seen through supplementary estimates A, sir, is those escalators lifting the cap on education and other programs that you will see, sir, through future supplementary estimates. So we are in transition.
But the money's flowing.
And the money's flowing, notwithstanding that.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I'm looking at the order paper question when I asked what your base funding was for the year and what your planned spending for the year was for increases, and you sent to me just a few days ago that it was going to be 2% for this year. So
and that was based on the main estimates? And that's what that number is, which has not included the future escalators beyond the 2% in the future estimates. So what you got was a snapshot.
Will we find, if I ask again, we'll find that that 2% has moved to 4.22% or whatever else? Or will it remain the same?
The base funding is the base. It's the starter, but the cap used to be on everything, right? And so this is the base. This is what finance and Treasury Board do, and then we have to justify everything we spend.
Well, I get that, but again, like I'm looking at wastewater, where the previous government spent billions, so that cap wasn't on wastewater. They actually put billions of dollars into wastewater. They put some money. They were putting the $1.9 billion into education, but the cap was still in place on base funding. So right now, 2016, 2017, the base funding that serves all the communities is at 2%. So is it going to be lifted, and when?
It's lifted now.
Well, not in what you gave me 2 days ago, so shall we have this conversation in a couple of months?
It's lifted. The 2% cap is not only talking, lifting the 2% cap isn't just talking, the cap was included everything. And we are lifting all of the program funding. We would like it to be that everything was in a base that was just a transfer to First Nations. That would be excellent. But at the moment, it's done on proposals, and there's the proposals we're funding are way above 2%.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I want to follow up on my colleagues' questions regarding our testimony with Cindy Blackstock. She came for the supplemental A's because there wasn't any money for Jordan's principal. Will in the following supplementals, will we see money for Jordan's principal?
Absolutely. We are absolutely committed to broadening the definition of Jordan's principle and making sure this happens. That
then, because
there is going to be, we are going to honor what was in Jordan's principle that we all voted for, and it means that provinces and territories have to work together, and we make sure those kids get what they need. It is, as you know, in the present definition, not one case qualified.
Yeah.
That is unacceptable, and so we are very much taking to ourselves the broader definition in terms of children with need, not some funny formula that makes sure nobody qualifies.
Well, thank you, because I mean, we're still seeing children being denied orthodontics at 99 and 100%. I mean, I know that's over in Health Canada, but if we don't see money in for Jordan's principal, the denials are going to have to continue. I want to ask, in terms of the child welfare, the government's identified 121 million. Cindy Blackstock puts it at 200 million, but the government only has 71 million. So even in 5 years, the shortfall will still be higher than what the government's put as its minimum base. She says to our committee that the government is closer to being in contempt of Parliament than in compliance. So how do you get there if in 5 years you're still not going to be meeting the needs?
Well, I think, again, we are committed to changing the system and putting the reforms in place. We also know that right now we're paying other families to look after kids that are being taken from their families because of poverty. We have got to change this system, and we're gonna get this done. But it was really important to ramp up the money, and then we will get this done in terms of there will be the adequate money from between the provinces and territories to fund this adequately, but also to fund the healing for the mums so they can be back being mums again.
Great, sorry, I have to cut it. They only give me 3 minutes, so this guy's a tough guy. So my last question. So I just want to get this straight on the issue of the temporary investments, the money that's flowing. If you say the 2% cap is off on base funding, what have you identified as the escalator then to address all that base funding that right now is only at 2%? Is that in the budget for this year?
So, Charlie, again, the base funding piece is separate from the program funding.
I know.
The program funding used to be capped, and that's where we got into big problems on schools.
Base funding has been capped for 20 years, so do you have an escalator?
No, the whole budget was capped.
Yeah, but I'm looking at the base funding, and do you have an escalator for it?
Program by program, I mean, I get on a lot of it, it'll be at 20% in
here, and this is what you gave me, so I'm going off. I just wonder if there is
we're over time here,
That's
Charlie,
all I'm
I'm afraid.
asking for.